December 17, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Hans Muller crouched in his frozen foxhole, putting pen to paper in a diary entry that would follow him for the rest of his life. The Americans, he wrote, were not like the Russians. Their artillery was different, not only in volume, though that was terrible enough, but in speed, in accuracy, and in the terrible certainty that you would have no time to react. One moment there was hush, the next, the world detonated. That foggy morning Muller watched something that shattered every assumption German soldiers had about American battlefield power. His battalion, part of the 6th SS Panzer Army, had launched Hitler's last gamble in the West and achieved complete surprise against thinly held American positions. Victory seemed attainable. Then American artillery found them. What the Germans advancing through those snow-covered woods could not know was that they were about to face the most lethal artillery system yet seen in warfare. A system so advanced, so devastating, and so precisely coordinated that it would break the back of Germany's last offensive and lay bare the depth of American military superiority. The collapse began long before the Battle of the Bulge. During 1943 and 1944, veterans transferred from the Eastern Front to fight Americans in Italy, France, and the Low Countries carried with them expectations forged under Soviet bombardments. Against Russian artillery, they had learned one hard truth: the Soviets would often fire ranging rounds, giving soldiers precious seconds to seek shelter. The pattern and timing were somewhat predictable, and fire direction was slow, frequently taking 10 to 15 minutes from observation to impact. Americans were terrifyingly different. Otto Schmidt, a veteran brought back from Tunisia after being captured in May 1943, later described his first encounter with American artillery in a post-war interview. His unit had taken position in a wadi north of Tunis and felt secure. If it had been the Russians, Schmidt thought, it would have taken them an hour to detect us and another hour to range their guns. They relaxed enough to heat coffee. Then a small observation aircraft, no larger perhaps than a light recon plane, puttered overhead at about 500 meters. They barely noticed it. Such planes carried no weapons and were assumed to be engaged in photography. 3 minutes later, without warning, without ranging shots, the valley erupted. Shells landed not in sequence but simultaneously, air bursts and ground bursts together. In 30 seconds, Schmidt's company ceased to exist as a fighting unit. He was one of 11 survivors out of 123 men. The little plane Schmidt had seen was the L-4 Grasshopper, the American Forward Observer platform. These unassuming Piper Cubs became the most feared aircraft in German eyes, not because they carried weapons, but because of what followed in their wake. German troops learned a bitter lesson. When a Grasshopper appeared overhead, you had minutes, sometimes seconds, before American artillery turned your location into a killing field. Friedrich Bauer, an artillery officer who had coordinated counter-battery fire on the Eastern Front, expressed his amazement in letters uncovered in German archives. Decades later, he had initially assumed captured American artillery procedures were propaganda. No artillery system could perform as described. Then he saw it. A Grasshopper appeared near Sino, before his guns could be limbered and firing data calculated. American shells were landing on his positions, not random bombardment or area saturation, but precise fire on each gun. They had calculated firing solutions, coordinated multiple batteries at different ranges, and delivered simultaneous impact faster than their observers could radio map coordinates to a fire direction center. American artillery superiority was not the result of a single innovation, but of a comprehensive system that integrated technology, training, and industrial capacity in ways Germany could not match. Central to this was the Fire Direction Center, FDC, a concept that transformed artillery employment. Whereas German batteries typically solved firing problems individually, American batteries fed their data into a central FDC that could coordinate dozens of batteries at once. The FDC relied on pre-computed firing tables. Across the United States, rooms full of women worked on mechanical calculators, slide rules, and logarithm tables to compute firing solutions for every plausible combination of variables: wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, barrel wear, propellant temperature, and altitude differences between gun and target. Those solutions were printed into pocket-sized manuals that let American fire direction officers calculate accurate firing data in minutes rather than hours. A captured German mathematician later examined American tables and could barely conceal his shock. He wrote that these tables represented years of calculation, thousands of hours on mechanical calculators, producing ready answers for conditions the Germans were still working out in the field. German firing tables were crude by comparison and demanded lengthy field calculations for each mission. The Americans had already done the math. But firing tables alone did not explain the Americans' deadly effectiveness. The real game-changer was the technique known as time-on-target (OT). TOT synchronized firing so that shells from multiple batteries, each at different distance and required flight time, arrived on the target simultaneously, typically within a 3-second window. The effect was catastrophic. German soldiers reported no warning, no ranging shots, no creeping build-up of fire. One instant silence, the next a simultaneous shower of explosions. Men in the open who might have survived a single ground or airburst had no time even to drop flat. Post-war studies found that 2/3 of artillery casualties happened in the first seconds of a barrage, and TOT was designed precisely to maximize that lethal surprise. Kurt Zimmermann, who survived TOT strikes in the Ardennes, wrote in a diary later recovered by American forces, "It is not artillery as we know it. You hear nothing and then the world ends. Every shell arrives at once. Airbursts kill those who might have survived groundbursts kill those who might have survived airbursts. There is no time to seek shelter." The speed of American response stunned German commanders. Under ideal conditions, German batteries could deliver fire in 8 to 10 minutes. American artillery routinely responded in 3. That rapidity came from multiple sources. American forward observers used new FM radios that provided clear, static-free communications. German units still relied largely on AM sets that suffered interference. Radio sets were more numerous in American units. Each infantry battalion had multiple radio-equipped forward observers, while German battalions typically had only 1 or 2 radios shared among units. The forward observers themselves were another advantage. German observers tended to be artillery officers with limited infantry experience. American observers, by contrast, were specially trained to understand both artillery and infantry tactics. They lived and moved with infantry units and treated fire support as an integral part of combined arms operations. Moreover, an American observer could call on the concentration of corps and army-level artillery. A single lieutenant requesting support might bring down the equivalent of a small airstrike, more accurately and more quickly than air support could usually deliver. One German regimental commander, whose unit was destroyed near Saint-Lô in July 1944, documented the effect in his final report. A lone American infantry company, by virtue of its forward observer, tied up his entire regiment for 6 hours. Every assault was driven back by artillery, not from a single battery but apparently from dozens. His regiment lost 400 men trying to overrun 120 Americans. American guns themselves reflected us. Industrial strength, the M2 howitzer, the standard light field piece, was a model of engineering and mass production. Rock Island Arsenal and other plants had refined manufacturing to precise tolerances. By war's end, 8,536 M2A1 howitzers had been produced. Each American infantry division carried 36 of these guns. In 3 battalions, those battalions were fully motorized, towed by trucks or half-tracks that could move at highway speeds. Displacing a battery that took German horse-drawn artillery 2 to 3 hours could be done by American motorized batteries in 20 to 30 minutes. German artillery, in contrast, remained heavily reliant on horses. Despite propaganda about mechanized panzer divisions, roughly 80% of German transport remained animal-powered. Moving, limbering and unlimbering guns required hours and many horses, operations that became nearly impossible in winter mud or under fire. American batteries could fire their mission and be gone, limbered onto trucks and ready to fire from a new position, long before German units had finished moving. The heavier American pieces gave commanders even more firepower. Each division had a battalion of M1 155mm howitzers, firing heavier shells to greater ranges and able to demolish fortifications that smaller guns could not. Some core-level assets included 8-inch and even 240mm howitzers capable of destroying hardened targets. The pyramiding of firepower meant a single infantry company could, within minutes, direct divisional or corps artillery onto a target. German artillery command and control was more rigid. Corps and army artillery were separate, centralized assets that could not be readily pressed into divisional operations without cumbersome approvals. Requesting corps artillery could take hours while the tactical situation changed. By contrast, the American system put massive responsive firepower under the immediate control of forward observers on the scene. Finally, American ammunition and fusing were superior. Where Germany suffered propellant shortages and inconsistent shell production, American industry produced large quantities of precise, reliable ammunition. Most decisive was the variable time VT, or proximity fuse, a compact radar transmitter and receiver in the shell's nose that detonated the projectile at an optimal height, typically 10 to 20 meters above the ground. The VT fuse produced lethal airbursts that dramatically increased the effectiveness of high-explosive shells. All these elements, advanced observation, rapid reliable communications, centralized fire direction, pre-computed firing data, motorized mobility, mass production of guns and ammunition, and technological innovations like the VT fuse, combined into an artillery system that overwhelmed German expectations and helped to shatter Germany's last major offensive in the West. The introduction of the VT fuse revolutionized artillery warfare. Conventional time fuses required exact calculations of a shell's time of flight. With the fuse set manually before firing, wind, temperature, barrel wear, and other factors could all alter trajectory. Even minor errors could cause shells to burst too high or bury themselves before detonation. The VT fuse eliminated those uncertainties, ensuring an ideal airburst under virtually any condition. The fuse made its combat debut on January 5, 1943, when the cruiser USS Helena used it to shoot down a Japanese dive bomber off Guadalcanal in only a few salvos. Throughout 1943 and 1944, proximity fuses proved devastatingly effective in naval anti-aircraft roles and in defending Britain against V-1 flying bombs. Still, fears that the technology might fall into German hands delayed its use in European ground combat. General Dwight D. Eisenhower personally requested permission to employ VT fuses during the Battle of the Bulge, arguing that their battlefield advantage outweighed any security risks. The Pentagon initially resisted, but Eisenhower pressed his case, and authorization was finally granted between December 19, 1944. Just as the German offensive reached its height, the results justified his insistence. When American gunners used VT-fused shells against German troops caught in the open during the Ardennes offensive, the effects were catastrophic. Naval testing had already shown that VT-fused rounds were 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ones against V1 second, destroying nearly 80% of incoming targets. A single VT shell could saturate a lethal area of 3,000 square feet, compared to roughly 60% for standard fuses. Some post-war estimates suggested that VT technology increased artillery effectiveness by 200 to 700%. German troops who had learned to survive traditional artillery by flattening themselves in shallow depressions discovered that this tactic no longer worked. VT shells detonated overhead, showering lethal fragments downward. Hans Müller, whose diary opened this account, survived one such barrage and described the horror. On the Eastern Front, we learned to go flat at the first explosion. Even a shallow hole could protect you from fragments traveling horizontally, but these shells, these demon shells as we called them, exploded above us. The fragments fell like rain. Men in foxholes died where they lay. Only deep bunkers offered any safety, and we had no time to dig them. We simply died. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical one. German soldiers trained to react instinctively to artillery by seeking cover now found that cover useless. The realization that only deep overhead protection could save them produced paralysis and dread. Friedrich Bauer recorded a near mutiny in his unit during the closing phase of the Ardennes campaign. We were ordered to attack an American position 300 meters away. The men refused. They had seen what happened to troops caught in the open under the new fuses. I told them we would die anyway if we stayed, that the Americans would overrun us, but they would not move. Capture seemed preferable to certain death under American fire. Behind this battlefield dominance stood America's immense industrial power. Factories like Rock Island Arsenal alone produced over 10,000 105mm howitzers, while others turned out 155mm and heavier weapons in staggering numbers. Ammunition output reached levels the Germans could scarcely imagine. Germany's war economy, crippled by Allied bombing, resource shortages, and inefficient planning, never came close to American production. Although many German artillery designs were technically superb, they were too few in number, and constant losses could not be replaced. By late 1944, some German batteries fought at half strength, their guns worn out and their ammunition rationed to a few shells per day. Lieutenant Werner Vogel, a German artillery officer, captured the desperation in his diary. "We received 50 shells per gun for the entire week. 50 shells to support an entire regiment under attack. Each mission required written justification. Meanwhile, the Americans fired thousands of rounds daily without hesitation. We fought a poor man's war against a rich man's enemy." This shortage-shaped doctrine itself. German artillery emphasized carefully planned, massed fire on high-value targets, executed only after approval through layers of command. American artillery emphasized immediacy, rapid responsive support to frontline troops. An American platoon leader could call for and receive accurate fire within minutes. A German officer might wait hours if he received any fire at all. Logistics revealed further contrasts. American artillery was entirely motorized, with truck convoys capable of hauling thousands of shells to forward batteries within hours. German batteries relied heavily on horses and railways, both vulnerable to weather and Allied air attacks. The US Army's standardized equipment further simplified supply chains. The same M1 fuse could be used on 105mm and 155mm shells alike. Germany's fragmented system, multiple fuse types, different calibers, inconsistent component supplies, produced chronic shortages despite adequate total output. The consequences on the battlefield were inescapable. German commanders, who concentrated forces, invited annihilation by American artillery. Those who dispersed their troops avoided destruction but lost combat power. The Ardennes offensive, the last great German push in the West, exposed these contradictions brutally. The offensive launched on December 16, 1944, with over 200,000 men and nearly 1,000 tanks, initially achieved tactical surprise. But once American artillery responded, the advance stalled. Horse-drawn German guns could not displace quickly enough. Batteries caught under counter-battery fire were destroyed in place. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann recorded the experience from his position south of St. Vith. "We had 50 shells per gun, our entire allowance. We fired one mission for our infantry. Within 10 minutes, American counterfire destroyed half our guns and most of the horses. We tried to move, but without horses the guns stayed where they were. We left them and retreated on foot." Even when US units faced temporary shortages, like at Bastogne where gunners were limited to 10 rounds per gun per day, American artillery still proved decisive. Once skies cleared after Christmas and resupply resumed, fire missions multiplied exponentially. During the Battle of the Bulge, 4,155 American guns fired more than 1.25 million shells, German units that had driven 50 kilometers into us. Lines were soon encircled and annihilated under relentless bombardment. Colonel Hinrich Müller, whose regiment had been destroyed at Saint-Lô months earlier, commanded a replacement regiment during the Bulge. Captured in January 1945, he wrote in his final report, "We were defeated by American artillery before we were defeated by their infantry or tanks. Every movement was seen by their aircraft and struck by their guns. Every concentration was shattered before we could attack. Every defense was smashed before their infantry came. We could not move, mass, or defend. We were simply destroyed. Germany's grand plan to reach Antwerp and split the Allied front collapsed within a week. Broken primarily by artillery, units that began the attack at full strength ended with 30 to 40% casualties. most inflicted by American shells. For German soldiers who survived, the experience was transformative. Captured troops sent to POW camps in the United States discovered that the same industrial machine that had overwhelmed them with artillery was producing tanks, aircraft, and trucks in numbers they had thought impossible. Otto Schmidt, captured in Tunisia and held in Texas, wrote home, "I have seen American industry, trains loaded with hundreds of artillery pieces roll daily to the ports. Factories produce shells by the thousands. The Americans did not defeat us with superior tactics or braver soldiers, though they had both. They defeated us with overwhelming industry. They could fire 100 shells where we fired one, and replace every loss within days. We could not." German officers held as POWs observed American artillery training and were struck by its methodical precision. Friedrich Bauer, the artillery officer captured in Italy, attended lectures given by us, instructors, and filled notebooks with notes. He concluded, "They have turned what we practiced as an art into a process. Where we relied on the skill of a few, they created systems that make competence universal. They built radios that anyone can use, tables that anyone can read. They industrialized gunnery." The transformation went beyond professional respect. Many captured Germans realized that their propaganda-fed notions of American weakness were false. The Americans they had fought were disciplined, innovative, and backed by industrial power that Germany could never hope to match. Hans Müller, captured after the Ardennes, reflected in his later diary, "We were told the Americans lacked courage, that they relied on machines because they were weak. These were lies. Their courage matched ours. But their weapons, their organization, their system, those made the difference. Above all, their artillery decided the war." By 1945, as Germany's position collapsed completely, American artillery only grew stronger. Ammunition output peaked, new technologies, better radios, fire direction computers, improved mobility, enhanced responsiveness even further. When the end came in May 1945, the American artillery arm stood as the most efficient and devastating in the world. A single battalion could deliver concentrated firepower on demand. Corps-level artillery could blanket entire map grids with precision. Forward observers could summon destruction in minutes. Hermann Werner Hoffmann, the mathematician who had once studied captured firing tables, was captured in the Ruhr Pocket and wrote a report for his American interrogators. American artillery represents the ultimate expression of industrial-age warfare. Their system does not depend on the brilliance of individuals. It produces consistent, overwhelming, rapid firepower through standardization and organization. It is a revolution in war, one we could never match. In the decades that followed, historians agreed, while tanks and aircraft captured public imagination, it was artillery that broke German attacks, supported Allied advances, and dominated the battlefield. German generals studying their defeat identified American artillery as the decisive factor. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote, "American artillery accomplished what we once thought impossible. They transformed artillery from a supporting arm into the central weapon of modern warfare. The innovations born in that conflict, time-on-target coordination, centralized fire direction, close integration of observers with maneuver units, remain at the heart of modern artillery doctrine. For those who faced it, the memory never faded." Kurt Zimmermann, who emigrated to the United States in the 1950s, summed it up simply in a 1960 interview. "I have been asked what weapon I feared most. Not tanks, not planes, not even infantry. It was American artillery. The sudden fire that came from nowhere, that killed without warning. That was true terror." The story of German soldiers and American artillery is ultimately a story about the transformation of war itself. Bravery and skill still mattered, but they were overshadowed by industrial capacity, systemization, and organization. The United States had built a machine of war that amplified the strength of the ordinary soldier. It was not genius or luck that broke the Wehrmacht's final offensive. It was a system. Trained men, standardized equipment, limitless production, and coordination at every level. That system, embodied in American artillery, became the decisive weapon of World War II and a lasting symbol of industrial age power.